What do I mean by they don't make good decisions? How does this work? There's obviously very well educated, very clever people grounded in history and the classics and things like this. Well, we're in a very fortunate position now to have had 20 years of neuroscience research, which shows us that someone who has to repress their feelings and emotions, like a child who has to survive in an institution without parents a very long period, actually impedes their ability to make choices, because we need our feelings, we need our emotions to make choices. We need our feelings and emotions to have values, to put them into practice. And what I call a hyper-rational education tends to train one hemisphere of the brain more than the other. So the left hemisphere starts to dominate. And what we've seen from recent research is that left hemisphere has a tendency to see a particular context and think it's the truth. What does this mean in practice? Well, I'll give you an example. Say, the British case, there's a tremendous fear of joining in Europe fully. And of course, the Brits have always been a little bit afraid of foreigners and thought themselves rather superior to foreigners, but I don't think it's quite that. If you take the kind of leaders, wounded leaders I'm talking about, being raised in children away from families, actually they had to give up on a sense of belonging. So how could they belong to something as adults? How could they really belong? Europeans say, well, the British say they'd like to be in Europe and leading it, but actually, how can you can't lead something unless you belong there, and it's almost impossible for this to be noticed in Britain, because we've taken for granted, we've normalized this kind of education, this kind of superiority, this kind of male leader who doesn't seem to need to belong, but has a sense of privilege and entitlement. So for me, it's a very retrogressive step that we have such leaders at this time in the world's history. The problem in Britain, of course, is we have associated this with tradition, with depth in our society, and in fact we're a very conservative nation in this respect. So we don't really want to look at the problems inherent in our education, because otherwise we'd have to really acknowledge what a very divided society we have, very much still out of step with our European neighbours. So we have what I call later on an entitlement illusion.